So I'll just start very briefly by thanking our speakers for coming. This is the third COVID impact webinar from WICB, and Brittany, and with some minimal help from me, has been organizing this particular one, which is how funding agencies have responded to the lessons that we've learned during the pandemic. And so our panelists today are, maybe you could just wave, are Teresa Good, who's the Division Director in MCB at NSF, Lynn Elmore, who's the Senior Scientific Director at American Cancer Society, Michael Sesma, who's a Program Director at NIGMS with a portfolio he can tell you about, but including the K99 program, and Joanna Watson, who's the Chief of the Tumor Metastasis Branch at NCI. And they're just going to each do a short presentation about how their agencies have thought about lessons learned from the pandemic. And then we're going to open the floor to discussion and then go into sort of smaller breakout rooms afterwards. I think we had suggested that Michael was going to go first.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen without embarrassing myself. Let's see. Can everybody see that? My presentation?
Yes.
Ah, good. Okay. So my name is Mike Sesma. I'm the branch chief for postdoctoral early career and workforce development programs at the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. I'm also a program officer in the Division of Genetics, Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology, where I have a portfolio of grants on the genetics of behavior and circadian biology. So I've got experience on both in training and career development, as well as managing a nice grant portfolio as well. So I'm going to cover some, in general, some NIH-related COVID-19 related flexibilities that were implemented beginning basically in the spring, towards the end of spring 2020, and have continued and adapted to the changing pandemic situation. So I'm going to cover those real quick and then just touch on how they might be significant for individuals who are in the transition between a postdoc and a faculty position or an early career, and some of the grant mechanisms that both NIH and NIGMS have to support people in those positions. So the first thing is, when you look at Mike Lauer is the deputy director for extramural activities. Basically, he runs the entire extramural program for NIH. He has a blog that you can subscribe to, which is not a bad idea. But this one was from September, almost a year ago, in which he described the COVID-19 related flexibilities for NIH grants. I provided the link there so you can take a look at that. And then, okay, it's not, okay, there we go. And then if you go to this link here, this will provide a complete list of all the flexibilities for applicants and grantees. And this is updated on a regular basis, as it's been kind of a changing situation to help people adapt and to accommodate some of the issues that investigators have dealt with in terms of seeking grant support, but also maintaining and sustaining their research program. So I'm going to cover those really quickly, but I suggest a good place to start is either these two web pages or the FAQs, on which I provided the link as well. So the first thing is we're looking at is flexibility related to application and review policy. So there's flexibilities related to the development of your applications. We've made adaptations in terms of review, just like NSF has. All of our reviews are continuing to be held virtually. And then another instruction that reviewers have who participate in our panels is that they're instructed to take pandemic related circumstances that are outlined in the biosketch of the application take those into account as they assess the scientific and technical merit of the application. There's flexibility related to applications that are submitted within the standard late submission policy, and almost all of the institutes have issued some kind of notice related to extending specific funding opportunities as well. So understanding that the change in the workplace from in-person to virtual really did have a big impact on the grant infrastructure at most institutions. So sometimes it was harder for people to pull all those things together in order for their Office of Sponsored Research to be able to submit the grant. So some of these flexibilities, some of you may have already taken advantage of, or you need to know more about. And then there's preliminary data, which is always important to include in an application because it demonstrates feasibility of a research or of research questions that you're interested in pursuing, as well as the technical aspects of being able to do those in your own lab, in your own setting. So typically that's included as part of the application. You weren't allowed to submit that after the application was submitted. But one of the flexibilities that was provided is there is an opportunity. There is a post-submission window in which you can provide additional information for your application. And one of those now is being able to provide preliminary data, a small amount of preliminary data that's related to the aims or goals and objectives that you provided. Other flexibilities are related to the extension of funded projects. So we have no cost extensions, which are pretty typical, but not all grant mechanisms are eligible for an automatic no-cost extension. Research projects are, but many training and career development mechanisms are not. So we are considering those on a case-by-case basis. We are considering funded extensions. That was a big question that we had from PIs when everything started, is that, my lab has been closed for 6 months or 3 months. Am I going to be able to get another year out of NIH to support this work? Well, not quite, but there are different ways to extend your research grant. And then we provided a variety of administrative supplements to address some of the needs of our investigators as well. Those are supplements that are awarded to existing grants for specific purposes. Related to early career scientists, we've had extensions of eligibility for the K99R00 and other career development programs. Typically, the eligibility is a 4-year window from the date you successfully defend or have your degree conferred. Well, some of the extensions have been in place for a while. Basically, it's the early stage investigator eligibility extensions that's applied. One of them that is well known is the childbirth extension, which is now an automatic 1-year extension for the primary caregiver or the birth parent. So that extends your eligibility for up to a year. And then there are other extensions that we provided based on when your temporary extensions that have been allowed as well. So the most important thing here is to talk to a program officer about these extensions to learn about your eligibility. And then for early stage investigator eligibility, the NIH has clarified its ESI FAQs and will consider requests for extensions for life events occurring during an extension period. So some of these were already in place, and now I think we've enhanced some of these extensions as well during the pandemic. Another thing that's important is once you get a grant, we expect you to make regular reports on your progress, as well as the financial status of the funds that you've been awarded, and for closeouts once the grant is ended. So some of those timelines, again, can be extended on a case-by-case basis. You'll need to talk to your awarding institute. And then the last flexibility is cost. Some institutes and centers may approve cost-related flexibilities, again, on a case-by-case basis. The most important thing for you to do in these cases, if you run into a situation where you thought you had more money than you did, or you haven't been able to spend it in a certain way, you can talk to your program officer about how you might address those particular issues. So I've been talking about early stage investigators, and I just want to make sure you all understand what that means, at least in terms of NIH. An early stage investigator is one who has completed their terminal degree or the end of their postgraduate clinical training and they are eligible for this status within 10 years of that degree or completion of that residency training. And so you remain eligible as long as you have not received a substantial NIH Independent Research Award, and that would be like the R01 that everybody knows about. And if you're an investigator at NIGMS, it would be an R35 or a MIRA as well. So there are lists of grants that you can hold and still be eligible as an early stage investigator. They're listed here. Again, if you go to the early stage investigator page on grants.nih.gov, you'll be able to find more information about that. Now, why is it important to know about extending your time as an early stage investigator? Well, as you know, as we hope you know, NIH has set funding targets for ESIs and prioritizes R01 applications with meritorious scores for funding. In other words, we're able to reach farther along the pay line to fund individuals who are at that stage in their career. We want to make sure that, part of that reason is to make sure we're bringing new blood into the system, to the grant system. But the other advantage is when your application is reviewed, peer reviewers are instructed and guided to look more at potential than an advanced track record. So they'll weigh both your academic and research background, and the expectation for preliminary data and publications is going to be probably a little bit lower than it is for an established investigator. And then the most important thing, I believe, is in the study section, ESI applications are reviewed in a cluster separate from the applications from established investigators. And that helps the reviewers develop a mindset for what they're looking at and what the expectations are for applications from ESI. And then finally, I want to just touch on, funding opportunities for junior faculty. And so this green circle, this is the whole track that is available pretty much across NIH. It's not a complete listing of all the programs, but these are the grant applications these are the grant programs that you might find suitable for your research area. That includes both career awards, the Ks, and then different research project grants. But one thing we want to do is encourage people in this stage in their career to apply for a substantial grant support mechanism from the very beginning. So an R01, I think I've already described the advantages of applying for an ESI R01. We also have a program called the MIRA at NIGMS, which is an R35. It's very similar, but it's not an aim-driven project. It's more of a funding opportunity to fund a research program rather than a circumscribed project. So I think I'm going to stop there. I think you're going to have these slides available, and what I've provided here are just descriptions of the R01. Here's a new R01 program called the CATS Early Stage Investigator R01. This is one that we have, the Maximize Investigators Research Award, MIRA, for early stage investigators. It's an R35. So these are different programs. And then the new Innovator Award, the DP2. And then these are smaller grants, depending on your institutional setting. They may be more appropriate for you as well. And in fact, what you're proposing to do. So I'm going to stop there. And I believe we're going to hear from a colleague from the National Cancer Institute.
Right. Thank you all very much. Thanks.
Okay, let's see if I can stop sharing now. Here we go. All right.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I'm going to take you through the NCI's sort of response to COVID. I'll give you a very brief sort of introduction by way of, I'm Joanna Watson. I am the chief of the tumor metastasis branch in the Division of Cancer Biology at the NCI. I've been at the NIH for about 17 years, the NCI 12, and I've been chief for the last 3. Like Michael, I wear multiple hats. I oversee a grant portfolio within the metastasis branch, but I also coordinate a variety of different programs One is running a regular workshop for our new grantees within the division. I also run a variety of longstanding programs themselves. Some are R01 mechanisms, some are sort of team science, cooperative agreement types of mechanisms. Recently, I've also been part of the Cancer Grand Challenges, which received sort of a lot of press as well, and I'm one of the program staff that's involved with that. And I want to start by talking about the NCI response to COVID itself. There was really a very robust, multi-pronged approach to the global pandemic. There was a congressional emergency appropriation of a little bit more than $300 million. And as a consequence of that, the NCI established a program known as the SeroNet, or the Sero Network. This is a mixture of both funded research grants and capacity building centers, and it's really designed to fully sort of develop serological diagnostics to understand the disease and the immune response in general, not just in patients with cancer, and really to identify high-risk populations by defining sort of the risk factors that are associated with the infection itself. This was in large part a joint effort between the NCI and the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And part of that is because the NCI and NIAID actually have the infrastructure to be able to really sort of establish something along the lines of the SeroNet. In conjunction with the CDC, the NCI and the Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease also established something known as the Sero Hub. This is an online dashboard which helps monitor seroprevalence throughout the country, both in terms of geography, population, and other factors, and really to establish sort of some estimates over time. At a more, at an NCI level, we did institute an emergency supplement program, and this was really for research investigators to study the impact of the SARS-CoV-2 infection and how it affected patients throughout the entire cancer spectrum. So disease progression, responses to therapy, survivorship, care delivery, all the way along. Projects had to be doable in 1 year. Little did we know that the pandemic was going to last for multiple years. And they were limited to 100,000 in direct costs. The number of awards that were actually made was quite substantial. I don't have an exact number, but I certainly from the ones within our own division, it was close to about 100 awards that actually went out. It did require that you had a currently active grant with the NCI to be able to apply for one of those. NCI itself also undertakes a whole variety of clinical research. And so in response to the pandemic, we restructured some of the clinical trials that allowed for online consent, some telemedicine. There were sort of changes in the way drugs were delivered. In part, this was to limit people actually having to come to the clinical center on the NIH campus. And then they also, the NCI elicited a number of sort of longitudinal studies, one looking at the natural history of the disease. They've managed to enroll approximately 2,000 patients with cancer who've also had COVID-19, and those are being interviewed and filling out assessments on a very regular basis so that we can follow the natural history. And then through one of our other divisions, they've initiated a large-scale genome-wide association study to try and identify both common and rare germline genetic variants that are associated with the susceptibility to severe or fatal COVID-19 disease. So there was the outside response with extra funding. There was the response that the NCI itself, in terms of its clinical research, pivoted. And obviously, as you've just heard from Michael, there was also a pivot in some of the extramural research as well. Michael already described sort of the changes in ESI eligibility status extensions, some of the reporting timeline extensions, and the review accommodations, particularly with this additional preliminary data. And I will say, I think that this was a very critical element that was required, given that the number of labs that sort of shut down and were functioning at low capacity, this additional preliminary data, I think, before a review meeting, being able to submit that was actually a very critical component. From the NCI standpoint, we've had a lot of increased flexibility for our existing awards that have high unobligated balance. So we've done a lot of restructuring, even sequential restructuring over the past couple of years, as long as there is the appropriate justification and rationale to do so. But we've sort of eased some of our requirements in doing that. But it's been quite amazing how many people have had repeated high unobligated balances. And part of that, I think, as we were chatting very early on in this webinar, is related to the fact that people haven't been able to hire sort of personnel. Okay, so those were sort of the responses. Just to give people a very general view of the NCI. The NCI is one of the largest NIH institutes. We have a budget that's approximately $6.5 billion a year. The vast majority of that, 75% of it, goes to our extramural programs, funding researchers like yourself in the community. I'm part of the Division of Cancer Biology, and we have the largest grant portfolio of all the various divisions. We support not only sort of the R01 mechanisms, but we also have a number of research programs, some of which are listed here. These programs in and of themselves can either involve R01 mechanisms, the Oncology Models Forum, for example, or the Tissue Engineering Collaborative. Those are R01 mechanisms, but also a lot of the other mechanisms involve U mechanisms, which are cooperative agreements. A lot of them are team science, the Cancer Systems Biology Consortium, for example, or the Translational Basic Science in early lesions. So throughout our division, we have large R01 portfolios for investigator-initiated research, but then we also establish a number of research programs. Some of these programs have actually even been initiated during the time of COVID, so it hasn't held us back, certainly from an NCI point of view, and probably from an GMS point of view, of being able to actually execute new programs and encourage people to participate. And lastly, I'll just end with this, is that the NCI is really big on cancer training. So we have trainings that are offered throughout several different avenues. We have our own cancer training branch, which does the institutional training grants, as well as individual career development, transition awards, the fellowships, and much as GMS, sorry, got a little brain problem today. We have a diversity training branch within the Center to Reduce Cancer Health Disparities. Again, individual awards, but these are really intended for students and scientists from populations underrepresented in the biomedical sciences. And then the NCI also has opportunities on a global health level. These are both institutional capacity building, mentor training, and an international research science development award. And that is actually the end of my slide presentation. So I can stop sharing, perhaps.
Just but in here for a second to say thank you to both of you. And do we have permission from all four of you to put your slides into the chat?
Yes.
We'll have all those links. Awesome. So I think that Lynn is going to go next, and I'll just pop those slides, a PDF of all those slides.
Wonderful. Great. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Lynn Elmore, and I am a Senior Scientific Director at the American Cancer Society. And hopefully, I am a Teams person totally. So hopefully you're seeing on Zoom. Do you all see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me just start. Okay, and I saw Ian, you had a comment in the chat. I figured I would answer that as I was going through the slides. I talk better than I type sometimes. So yes, so the American Cancer Society, we have a number of pillars, Cancer Action Network, Advancing Discovery, and Patient Support. And as you can imagine, when COVID hit, it really impacted us. Unlike some of the representatives from the governmental funding agencies, all of our budget is donor dollars. And a lot of those relied on the walks, the galas, getting people together. So we were in a real predicament. Kudos to our development and philanthropy folks. They did a great job pivoting where they needed to, but still, it was a nervous time in 2020. We didn't know what to do. So in the spring of 2020, we actually had a limited scope review. We allowed some people that could only come back one more time with the Research Scholar Grant, which is our R01 equivalent. And so that's what we did in the spring. And then in the fall, we actually canceled totally. And but in hindsight, I mean, it was a great decision because we got more money than we thought. We were able to pick up some of those individuals that were in our pay-if pool is what we call, those that are worthy of funding, but we don't quite have the budget. So we were able to pull out a lot of those at the pay-if pool. And then we have come back strong. So in this second slide, I just want to show you, here you see in the United States, for the 2021 funding, we came out of the blocks with 176 grants funded for a total of 113.5 million. 13 different grant mechanisms and representing 99 different institutions across the country. And on the left-hand side here, you'll see what our total investment is. We have about a little bit over 400 million in the different mechanisms. And again, a very broad reach across not-for-profit institutions in the US. Just to show you our cancer types covered by funding in 2021, it's very typical of what we would see before the pandemic. We see a lot of breast cancer in our investigator-initiated model. We have about 22% that come in that aren't specific for a different specific cancer type. Some of those are more fundamental in their focus. So in extramural discovery science, so like Joanna was saying for the NCI, we have intramural and we have extramural as well. Extramural gets a lot of our budget. And during COVID, we had some restructuring that happened. And I would say it wasn't all COVID, it was a change of leadership. But those things together caused us to programmatically restructure. We used to have 6 different extramural programs. We collapsed those down to 3. But I want everyone to appreciate in the audience, we did not narrow our scientific scope. We have a really big scope. Essentially, 3 program directors are now doing essentially the work of about 6, and we're trying to do things to reach groups more broadly, doing things more digitally. But so we do have this wide range of investigator-initiated projects across 3 programs. We have a basic program called Biochemistry and Immunology of Cancer. We have the Cell Biology and Preclinical Cancer Research Program, and that's the program that I direct. And then we also have a Clinical and Cancer Control Research Program. But we do offer special initiatives and RFAs. This allows us to strategically pivot to address high impact areas. And since COVID, these are some areas that we have changed and it used to be more investigator initiated. Now there's a little bit more of those special initiatives, and I'll talk a little bit about those. So here's our structure right now. We have 3 programs, and I mentioned those 3 to you. At the top are our the scientific directors and the program managers. Want to point out to you all, spread the word. We are needing to hire a program manager for the clinical and cancer research program. And we are also looking to bring on a scientific director. Dr. Elvin Daniels is still in experimental discovery science, but she is now our senior VP. So we're looking to fill that out. But you can see at the very bottom of the slide, these are our standard peer review committees. And you can see just the breadth of the topics that we review. And also want to make note, health equity focus very much in this clinical and cancer control research program. For 20 years, we've been doing health equity. We've upped our investment now. One thing that COVID taught us was just to really shine a bright light on those health inequities, the problems with workforce diversity, and I'll share some of those new things we're doing there. We continue to have grant mechanisms at all different career stages. We have a really robust postdoctoral fellowship program. In terms of early career, we have a clinician scientist development grant. We have a really strong institutional research grant that we're actually using to really streamline administratively some new opportunities. We have our research scholar grant for early stage investigators, and this is our R01 equivalent. We still have our mid and late stage American Cancer Society Professor Awards, which are highly honorific. And then at all stages, we have special initiatives. So we have our Mission Boost that's special for to boost the investment of some of our current or former ACS grantees that are going to be testing in patients within 2 years. Discovery Boost, I want to mention, though, is something new. We've heard from a lot of people we need pilot projects. So this is a 2-year pilot project open to everybody in the scientific community. You need to align with one of our 6 new research priorities that you'll find on cancer.org, but we're really looking for highly innovative, high risk, high reward. So that's something that's new that's just been launched this year. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit of our diversity in cancer research program that has just really been growing, and we're really excited about that. So here we have DICER is what we call it. It's a diversity in cancer research program. This was launched in the middle of the pandemic, saying we need to do more in this space. And so my colleague, Shonda Felton, is actually the program manager of that. You'll see a lot of information on cancer.org, so I would direct you there. But if you have any specific questions, she's the one that has the answers. But really the goal here is a real holistic approach to increase workforce diversity and inclusion and advance cancer health equity research. It's an umbrella program, and you'll see, so we launched last summer the Diversity in Cancer Research Summer Internship Program for undergraduates. And again, this is being administratively handled through our institutional research grants all over the country. We have 37 at different institutions. We're also offering for these institutional research grants an additional slot if you're going to select a underrepresented minority for that, to help an early stage investigator. We're doing DICER institutional development grants at historically Black medical colleges. So this is something we've launched the last year. And we've also last year launched a $10 million investment to fund health equity research centers at minority serving institutions, something we're really excited about. That's come back for, we're doing it again for 10 million more. And it's really neat. Scientific scope here. So we're accessing minority serving institutions. They're going to be the primary institution. They can partner with other institutions, but they need to address a problem in their community, and they're going to tackle that community problem related to health equity or health inequity rather. Okay, then I just want to talk about some of the things that the American Cancer Society has done in response to COVID. And you've heard some of these things from the previous speakers, but we have expanded no-cost extension opportunities. We started that in 2020, and we are covering that through 2023. So when grants that are ending December 31, we'll revisit in 2023 if we think we need to extend it. We're relaxing reporting deadlines. Again, that started in 2020. We're going to continue that 2023. We may continue out into 24 if we're hearing from our grantees that there's a need for this. We have expanded eligibility. We've expanded the allowable expenditures for our postdoctoral fellows. They're given a special allowance in the last year of their fellowship to travel. And for some, we've allowed a streamlined no-cost extension for just about all of our grants, including our postdocs. And I think, as Mike had mentioned, typically this isn't a no-cost extension opportunity, but we give that to them. We're also letting them use their travel expenses for whatever they want to do to benefit the fellow. We have extended the eligibility for our research scholar grant. It used to be that PhDs or non-clinician scientists had 6 years after their first independent faculty position. We gave clinician scientists that are actively seeing patients 8 years. Now we give everybody 10 years. So that helps the early stage investigators, but we were also hearing from some of those folks that were entering, that the mid-career stage that really needed that boost too. So it's there, we've extended eligibility. We haven't been so formal in terms of our training and telling them, guidelines to our reviewers to what to, to look at since the COVID pandemic. But we have during the, the program directors and the managers, when giving assignments and before the meetings, would say, hey, we all know we're in a pandemic. You need to look through the lens. There's going to be a lot of people that aren't going to be able to come in and address criticisms from previous critiques by adding complementary data. We ask them to be particularly sensitive for those clinician scientists who may have been removed from the lab into all different types of needs in the clinical setting. So we just told people to be very mindful of that. The last thing I just want to mention, one thing we did, we hosted a life work in balance virtual event. We had two of our research professors, Dr. Yibin Kang and Dr. Karen Freud, moderated that. We invited one afternoon, we invited all our postdocs. Second afternoon, we invited our research scholar grants. And we actually were there just to say, how are you doing? What are your problems? What can we do to help? And it was really the early stage investigators and the, including the postdocs, just really loved this because they were like, everyone's so busy, everybody's so stressed. This is frankly the first time someone asked how we're doing. After these two groups met, we actually did a survey and we wanted to get quantitative data. And then we threw it out to the group and said, hey, we think we have something that may be worthy of a perspective. Because you had some perspectives that were out there published about what to do during the pandemic, but our group of grantees felt like it didn't really focus on the early stage investigators. And, those early programs that aren't as stable, you don't have the rich network, those 50% of our grantees that are women, they were having a lot of challenges balancing lots of things in the household. So we were really pleased that we helped advise them, but a group of our grantees, and you'll see on the left-hand side, they published trends in cancer perspective. And they did a great job. I would encourage you, there's the hyperlink at the bottom on the right-hand side, to take a look at that. They had some great suggestions in terms of, what can be done at the institution, what their challenges have been, what about tenure, what about funding, how to balance life. And so that was just something we did that was very impactful during this time. So I think with that, I am going to stop sharing the screen. And I really look forward to, the Q&A and getting in the breakouts and talking a little bit more about other things that we can do, particularly in the nonprofit funding space. Thank you.
I'm going to unmute and then try to share go into presentation mode. Hopefully that's working. Hi, I'm Teresa Good. I am from the National Science Foundation, from the Division of Molecular and Cellular Biosciences. And so a lot of what NSF did really parallels what happened at some of the activities or the flexibilities that NIH offered and that the American Cancer Society offered. So there's going to be not too much new, but maybe there's a little twist on what we're going to, some of the things that we did. But one of the things I wanted to start with is that NSF is changing, and that we always had two merit review criteria, intellectual merit and broader impact. Well, we, for the first time, have a new strategic goal, and it is our first strategic goal, which is empowering people, empowering STEM talent. And that is really a kind of that it's first and that it's about people is a change in philosophy at NSF. And the ways that we talk about broader impacts is really now benefiting society. And again, that is a change in the way that we talk about what our mission is. And that I think, and this is new this year, and so I think it will translate to changes in the way that we do business. The other thing that is new, that NSF always had a number of science directorates and engineering directorates that fund science, but we have a brand new directorate. It is the Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate, and it is explicitly about how do we translate impact of the science that we fund to impact society, whether that is about COVID or that is about climate change or is it about anything. And again, it is a big change in how we do business. I am, in the Division of Molecular and Cellular Biosciences. So if you are a cell biologist, then this is probably where you get your funding. If you come to NSF, that we are one of the 4 divisions in the biological sciences, that we, support quantitative predictive theory-driven science through 4 core programs: genetic mechanisms, molecular biophysics, cellular dynamics and function, systems and synthetic biology. That our budget is about 155 million. That translates to around 200 awards, 300 or so people per year, with an average award size of about 200K a year. That we accept proposals for core programs, so investigator-initiated grants, things I'm going to call transitions, and a number of other opportunities without deadline. And so COVID, no COVID, you can submit a proposal 365 days a year. There are other things that have deadlines, but are the vast majority of our funding, at least in the biological sciences and in engineering and a few other parts of NSF, go out. We accept the proposals any day of the year, and that was actually very helpful during COVID. That some of the things that we did during COVID, that we got some specific funding from the CARES Act, that I think the whole agency got about close to $80 million. We spent the MCB portion of that on awards that we could make without review, that are small awards, that we could do some things to address the kind of basic science around coronavirus, or develop sensors, or understand viral evolution and mutation. And we developed after that a couple of new funding opportunities, specifically to address future pandemics, whether it is developing sentinel cells that would be able to survey and respond to infectious diseases, or the center proposals for predictive intelligence for pandemic prevention, that really is bringing interdisciplinary approaches to address many problems and how you might predict future pandemics. So that's some of what we did. The other thing that we did is we gave away some money, so that people, we allowed no cost extensions. We had flexibility about how you use the funding that you already had, but that one of the things that we did at the end of the last fiscal year is that if anyone's grant was running out of money, we not only did we give them a no cost extension, but we gave them extra money, because we knew, that was part of what happened, is that you paid people that didn't do anything, you didn't finish your specific aims. And so we gave away supplements, and we were very, I would say, open to all of the possible requests for supplements. Most of those went to support people, whether they were postdoctoral fellows or postdoc students or graduate students or undergraduates. Most of them went to people. The other thing that we did the CARES Act was the first thing. Then we got ARP funding. So the next, I can't even remember what, American Recovery Plan, that must be the name of it. So the agency got about 300 million. That within the division, we got about 12 million. What we really did in the biological sciences, or most of the foundation, was to use that money to fund people at critical career transitions. So whether it was, so every postdoc we had, we gave them an extra year of funding. That we funded more career awards in the foundation. So this is the kind of first big grant you get from NSF. We made more of those awards than we ever have. The other thing we did is put money into things that we are calling mid-career awards. So one of them is called mid-career advancement. It is really, if your research you're an associate professor, your research stalled, it's kind of to help you get started again. Or transitions, your research is going fine, but you need to change direction. You're at the associate or full professor level. And so transitions is really to allow you to change directions and continue along a different path. And so we put more money into all of those things that we thought were people at critical transitions. And we really thought about the suite of awards that we had that helped people at different stages of their careers, whether it was K through 12, we put more money and developed new programs for teacher sites, but we always gave supplements to support teachers or high school students. that they always were programs to support undergraduates, whether it's in supplements or sites, that we developed a number of new programs to support post-baccalaureate students and it mimics some of what NIH was already doing. To be honest, we looked at their playbook and we said, the community needs this. There were lots of people who didn't get research experiences, and those people will be left behind. And so we, first the way we gave away supplements, and this year we gave away the first set of post-baccalaureate site grants. A number of programs for graduate students, and then postdocs. And while in biology, we always were giving postdoctoral fellowships. And again, as I said, during COVID, we extended the year of those grants that were ending. But the rest of the foundation has decided that maybe we need to start funding postdocs or postdoctoral fellows in all disciplines. And then the other new thing we did is building research capacity in bio. So it's really in your first 3 years of a faculty appointment, and they're targeted, and there are these awards in the biological sciences. They are also similar awards in other disciplines, but these really are targeting faculty at under-resourced institutions because those really fared worse during the pandemic. We still, again, I told you, we put more money into careers, and then we put more money into these mid-career transitions that for lots of reasons, labs closed, lives happened and people's lives got stuck. And we will need to continue to do this. There may not be any special appropriations again to help support those things, but we recognize that this is an ongoing need that doesn't end when we're allowed to go back into the lab or to the office. And so I think that's the last slide I have. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to the moderator.
Hey everyone, I'm just going to share one more slide. So as many of you know, HHMI has this new program. As some people mentioned, one of the big things that happened during the pandemic is perhaps late but drastically increased awareness of inequities in our society and in our scientific enterprise. And HHMI is investing quite a large amount of money in a new program for young investigators. And they really wanted to be here today to talk about it, but they're doing their investigator review today right now, so they couldn't, but they gave me this slide to talk about this program that's named in honor of Freeman Hrabowski. And it's quite a large award for junior faculty who will prioritize excellence in their own research, while also prioritizing an equitable and inclusive lab climate in these different categories. So I encourage people to go look at that program. In terms of sort of COVID mitigations, they had been planning this program for some time, and they increased the eligibility for a year beyond what they had originally planned. So maybe that's a small thing in terms of COVID response, but I wanted to just share about this program. All right, so thank you to everyone. I really particularly appreciate how everyone's taking a people first attitude. And I think Brittany's going to moderate the questions here, which we'll do. Brittany can decide for how long before we do breakout rooms.
I think maybe 10 minutes or so. So if anyone has questions now, I have a few written down, but if anyone wants to just raise their hands and then I can call on you in the group. So I can get started with a question while we're waiting for people to get up the courage to ask their questions here. So one of the things that I'm wondering from all of you is, how are you sort of tracking, or what sort of metrics do you have for figuring out which of these changes you've implemented in response to the pandemic in terms of eligibility, and extra extensions on funding, which ones are the most effective? This is for all panelists. Anyone about it. So
So
Teresa,
I-
I see that you have your hand raised.
So I don't think we're going to know right away. And maybe, my colleagues disagree with me, but I think that we are just beginning to see the impacts, or some of them are still hidden to us. And so did the no cost extent. And so, yes, we're trying to track what has happened in the community, but I think it will be way too early to tell.
I guess,
in terms, oh, go ahead.
no, please, Lynn.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of tracking the metrics, we're not planning to really do a deep dive with metrics. We engage with our grantees a lot. We get testimonials from them. We may be sending a survey and, adapted from that original survey that came out in 2020 to say how you're doing, but we're not going to do a deep dive with metrics. We have new leadership at the American Cancer Society. Metrics is our focus, and we're going to be tracking lots of things, but I don't believe, what we've done specifically 2020 to 2023 is going to be a big part of that.
Michael?
Yeah, I would say it may actually be premature to look at the impact of these flexibilities, because we're not through this yet. First of all, we're not through this yet. Second, I think what at least a GM, and I would probably say most of the other NIH institutes were keeping track of application rate as well as success rate. So that's one way to look at how these flexibilities have affected, had an impact on, had a positive or a negative impact on the grantee community. So, we expect that we want to maintain the success rates that we had before all of this started. And I think for the most part, we seem to have done that. I think the number of applications and the number of grants that are funded annually hasn't changed that much. There's been an absolute increase just because I think we've had increases in our budget for the last few years. That could all change. So much of what we do is budget driven, and the budget is every year, but we have carrying costs every year, or continuing costs basically every year as well. So to keep that ratio from continuing costs to new awards constant, I think that's kind of what we're hoping that these flexibilities allow us to do. So, but I still think it's premature. We've got a really good analytics shop at NIGMS, and so I don't think they've started to explore that yet. So it's still early to tell. But I can tell you that we do have a lot of inquiries about, what flexibilities, particularly with the K99 program that I manage, and the Mosaic K99 program, fellowships and career awards. We're getting a lot of questions about extensions of eligibility, extensions of the grant period that was awarded. How do they, how are we handling carryover of unobligated balances, those kinds of things. So those are all issues that are related to these things.
So we have a question from Alyssa.
Yes, it's unrelated to that, but the question I had was, so in bio sketches, should we dedicate as applicants a space to talk about how COVID has impacted, and to what level of detail should we go?
Well, I'll go first since I mentioned that at the beginning. Yeah, I think there is a specific notice about how to manage this with your biosketch. I think there's a personal statement in the biosketch, as well as an area where you can list specific accomplishments and contributions to the field. So I think this is going to require some nuance. You have to explain, what the cause of any disruptions were, or how they were managed, and how much time did you lose? What kind of time did you lose? Did it reduce your time at the bench to 50%? Were you really restricted because you were the primary caregiver in your family, and you basically didn't have daycare for a year, or didn't have schools for a year? So that really, change things. You weren't able to hire people because of the pandemic. All of those things can bear on, the biosketch is the first place that you put this, I suppose, in the progress report section of your application. There might be some other ways that you could reference that. But the reviewers look at everything, including the biosketch. So it's important that you take advantage of that opportunity to provide that information.
I'm going to piggyback onto Michael there. I think the other part that I would encourage people to do is, obviously, if it has had a dramatic impact on you being able to conduct your research, having a letter of support from your department chair or your head of your division, there's no harm in including that in the application to say that this influenced all of these various things. So I would encourage people to take advantage of that as well.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same, Joanna, to any of the letters of supports or collaborations, but I would also say for all resubmissions at the American Cancer Society, you're giving up to 3 pages to respond to reviewers' critiques. And they may say, you don't have preliminary data, or too high risk, high reward, or that's where you can respond to say, hey, under normal situations, we may have been able to do this, we haven't been able to. So really in that response to reviewers' critiques, because we try to get it in the hands of the same reviewers, they're going to really focus on those 3 pages and then be directed by the applicant where the changes were. So that's front and center for any resubs. But I think definitely for new submissions, the personal statement as well as the letter of supports, like the others have said.
Teresa, you want to hop in with your reply?
Yeah, so NSF is different, right? So I think that we're on the fence of what will reviewers do with this information, and will people be comfortable including it in their biosketch? And so we have yet to have any policy about that. And letters of support are not allowed, because that, they just, that's not part of the NSF thing. And so we don't, and so I think we are still kind of struggling of what will be reasonable. And so I think we're going to pay attention to the NIH experience and how well reviewers deal with that information. And does it really make a difference in terms of how the panels respond, or the study sections respond to those applicants? So looking forward to hearing how that goes.
I think it's important to remember that every reviewer in the room probably has had similar experiences with their own lab, with their own mentees. And so, there's, I think, an understanding, if that information is there, they're receptive to it because they've seen it happen with their own, on their own, personally, or with people that they've worked with, new faculty, fellows, postdocs, et cetera. So they're going to be receptive to it. You don't just throw it in there. I think there has to be some elucidation of what happened, but
so I think, Trey, you're the first person to raise your hand.
So just to understand this, so is this something that every applicant has to put in their application, or only somebody? Because I think that is a major issue here, because a lot of applicants are not comfortable mentioning the hardships they have faced because they think that will be held against them. And so putting right now, the entire onus is on the applicants. They have to make a case, they have to justify. And then if the reviewers feel it's right, or they should consider it, they do it. I think this is going around the whole thing the wrong way, because as usual, the same group of people get penalized again and again. It's like a different form of penalization, but each time it's the same group that gets attacked. And so I think it should be a requirement. If your statement is as simple, COVID did not impact my lab and the functioning of my lab, that's fine. But there should be a required section in every application. How did COVID impact you? Because it was a worldwide event. It's not like you were not in a universe where COVID did not happen. So everybody is forced to mention this. This also highlights if a lab has amazing productivity and it looks like their application is fantastic, and another lab has a good application but the productivity is weak. And you can see these, compare the COVID statements, and you can see that, okay, this lab that does not have that great productivity has had some issues. And these things don't get highlighted. When a good application comes by, when I say good, I mean, fantastic productivity in the last 2 years, I'm often concerned. I'm like, how are they producing so well? But I've been on study sections when I've seen the opposite impact. They're like, oh, they've done amazing work. And I'm like, how? How did they manage to do this amazing work? Because we are all struggling here. So I think there should be some more responsibility taken by the funding agencies in making sure that it should be more fair, is how I'm trying to put it. And if I can just quickly mention one more point, is I haven't seen SROs, or usually they instruct us how we should be fair in our reviews. I haven't really seen them. Some of them will do it, but talk about how we should be cognizant of the COVID issue. So that is also something, it is left to the individual how they think about it, and I don't think that's right. So that was my 2 cents. Yeah.
So I will say that even before COVID, if you have a gap in productivity, I would encourage people to explain that gap in productivity in that biosketch. It doesn't have to be in such detail, but it's enough information to actually sort of say, yeah, I recognize that I have a gap in my publication list, or I have a gap in my overall sort of productivity, but these are the reasons why. It is in the eye of the beholder in terms of the reviewer and how they weight that, but the hope is that you will get a reviewer who is cognizant of problems, but really loves your science, and therefore becomes a champion of that and explains that to the rest of the community, or the committee.
I think the key is that the opportunity, and I guess maybe it's encouragement. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but to share that information as part of your biosketch is entirely up to the applicant, to the PI. And they can share the details. I think Joanne's right. You have to be careful. TMI is not always a good thing, right? It's too much. So there's some nuance to it, but it does encourage applicants to consider whether or not they want to include that, but also encourages the reviewers to acknowledge that that information might be there, and it might provide some insight into this, where people are in their career and how productive they've been. Certainly, I think Joanne's point about if there's a gap that's affected your productivity, and it's not unusual for female women scientists to have a gap because they're the primary caregiver for their children, or they gave birth. Men can say, yeah, we had a child and it affected my time in the lab because I took paternity leave, but we know it's very different for women and the primary caregivers. So, those things are, that can be part of your biosketch. Whether you choose to do that or not is entirely up to the applicant.
I would, just before we move on, I've got one last point to that. If you are serving as a reviewer, yes, I would also encourage you as a reviewer to speak up in defense of that. The situation only changes when there are voices heard.
Right.
Thank you. So Ian, your next question.
Thanks. I've really liked this discussion, and I think obviously there's not good answers to a lot of these, which is partly why we're having this. I care about this for myself and our own lab's funding, but I think I'm particularly focused on thinking about, as I mentioned in the chat, like our junior faculty and our trainees, and how do we enable that. The previous conversation that we had, one of the things that we discussed a lot was, the nature of metrics, and that it can be really hard to quantify a lot of these things. And so moving to that point of, narratives and not having to put a number on something is helpful. I think the biosketch, and Michael, you mentioned that too, I think is helpful for providing that. I think that it is worth recognizing that we're talking about a whole spectrum of very complicated situations here. And so the version that you articulated where your daycare was closed for a year and a half and you didn't have another option, like obviously that's a no-brainer. That's a hugely challenging situation and maybe something that you can write in your bio sketch. I think a situation where the cascading consequences of the pandemic created substantial mental health challenges, or, you know, for a loved one or something like that, that is a bit of a harder thing to put in there. And I think that that's what we need to all collectively struggle with, is thinking about both how we discuss and highlight these things, how we evaluate these things. And I really appreciate the comment too, that it's not just on the applicant and not just on the agency, but also on the reviewers. But I think that it is this complex set of those things. And many of these challenges, like mental health ones, are going to persist for a while. And so recognizing that this is something, as I mentioned in the chat too, that I don't think that we can just be like, done, you know, there was that 1 year gap where there was a productivity delay and now things are solved. And, you know, this is not a question at all, as much as like, you know, just thinking, you know, curious for the sense of how you all are grappling with the need to continue to innovate in that way and how to continue to address this moving forward.
You know, I would say that some of these changes and these flexibilities, whatever we're going to call them, were spurred by lots of feedback from the research community, the applicant community, the grantee community, even the reviewer community. So, and this was part of the response. You know, we have 27 institutes at NIH, 24 of them have funding authority. That means there's probably maybe more than 24 ways of doing things, because institutes have different components as well. So the fact that some of these things were instituted NIH wide is pretty important to acknowledge and recognize that these were ways that collectively the NIH decided to adapt to some of the issues that were facing applicants and investigators. So, but you know, I think everybody has the choice of what they want to provide and how they want to structure their application. So.
But I think one of the challenges is when you have many different grant mechanisms, we really stress to our reviewers, focus on the evaluation criteria.
Right.
So, you know, is this going to be the candidate? So you're just look at the candidate, or is it going to bleed over into other evaluation criteria? And how do we do that? So I think we need to be really clear, because we don't want all the reviewers to be deviating too much from the strengths and weaknesses of the evaluation criteria, but we're all human and we want to take that into consideration. So, yeah, some interesting suggestions and things to ponder for sure.
Teresa, did you have another response?
Well, and I think that one of the things at NSF is that our program directors have tremendous flexibility. So even if our reviewers do not, and we don't explicitly ask them to consider COVID impacts, but our program directors are free to consider all of those impacts as they try to balance their portfolio. And I think that that is a very important step that they take as they're considering who to fund.
So I think we'll take one more question. Mira, you have your hand raised, and then we'll move to the breakouts.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to follow up on what was discussed about the impacts of COVID that, you know, sometimes can be hard to articulate. So just as an example, we had to cut our mouse colony down by 75% during COVID. And part of the reason was we were asked to make life safer for animal care technicians, and we really wanted to help them out. So we did that so that they wouldn't have to come in as often, you know, when everyone was particularly vulnerable to infection. But my understanding is not everyone, you know, took care of other people necessarily in the same way. And again, it's just one of those things that you kind of have to explain to the reviewers in some way. And also, we were fortunate in that we mostly have people who commute on foot or by car. But I would imagine someone who has trainees commuting via public transportation would probably have to shut down their lab's operation a lot more than, for example, we had. So I think it's hard to come up with a rule for every scenario, but it's good for people to know that maybe they can bring these things up. And I actually ended up mentioning this in the progress report because the reviewers were questioning productivity And I figured, well, that's one way to explain, because everyone understands that it takes a year to come back from cutting down the mouse colony, and hopefully that worked. But I don't know if people maybe should be provided with a range of scenarios and just say, if you would like to discuss something along those lines, you can do it in your biosketch, or if it's a renewal, you can maybe do it in your progress report. But it might be good to let people know that that's acceptable.
Well, in the RPPR, there's actually 2 sections where the grantee can comment on challenges they've had to deal with over the course of the last year. So, we were seeing the issues related to having to basically lose your colony of specially bred animals, or developmental work that was affected because you couldn't get into the lab, or the rotation of people working solo in the lab when sometimes an experiment would take 2 or 3 sets of hands. All of those things, some of those things were mentioned. We saw those first in the research progress reports. So, and certainly it carries over into applications as well.
So I just wanted to bring up, we were going to sort of move into breakout rooms now, but we're having a really good discussion as a group. So if you'd like to continue the group discussion, raise your hand. All right, it seems that we have a quorum to continue the group discussion here. So I'll ask one question that I noticed came up in the chat. And I just wanted to bring attention to it. I think the person who asked it has left now, or else I would ask them to do it. But there was a comment in the chat about whether or not there are any special funding opportunities for example, Ukrainian researchers. And that, I think I'd like to open that up a little bit more broadly and think about our non-US citizen trainees who have additional impacts related to the pandemic, from restrictions on being able to travel home and these huge, visa backlogs. And, in some cases that can really disproportionately affect their productivity if they're sort of stranded in COVID quarantine in their home country and having difficulty coming back. And this is a population that already is kind of in a gap, especially in terms of not being able to apply for government funding here. So I'm wondering if there's anything that any of you have thought about, or especially you, Lynn, since you're at a nonprofit, about whether or not there are ways to provide extra support for these international people who are disproportionately affected right now.
Yeah, I could comment briefly. The American Cancer Society has pretty strict policies in terms of citizenship requirements. And so our postdoctoral fellows need to be US citizens or have their residency, but we are thinking about changing that. So that's something that we've heard. So that's something that may be changing, which is a good thing. In terms of our other grant mechanisms, we only allow the primary institution being those that are US based or territories. People can collaborate with them, but you have to make a strong justification. Where the American Cancer Society, so typically, it has to be a case where they have an international collaboration. It's the only one possible, and then we make that happen. But with that said, Dr. Knutson, our CEO, she was one that really was instrumental in pivoting and helping cancer patients in Ukraine by translating the American Cancer Society literature and really helping with patient services. And when I met with her at ASCO at a reception, she told all of us and a group of people in extramural and intramural research, I want you to start thinking out of the box, think about what we can do to partner and have more of a global presence. So that's something we are going to be looking at. And so some of these policies that are just firm across the organization that we never had wiggle room, I think that might be changing. But that's all. Can't provide many other details because it's still in exploration.
I mean, Avi had a great point in the chat on this that you can go ahead and bring it up, Avi, about the great resignation issues.
We were chatting a little bit about this before the room opened, which is that, you know, one thing people are really struggling with during and post COVID is hiring, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, COVID related, indirectly and indirectly. And so, you know, I'd love to talk about a number of things that will last beyond the immediate effects of the previous phase of this pandemic, but that's one of them. Like, what can funding agencies do to help people want to be in fundamental research, to help people who are doing running labs to be able to hire the people who we need to do the work?
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in and give my perspective a little bit. So I'm a pandemic PI. I started my lab in mid-August 2020. And so when I started my lab, I put out ads to hire 2 technicians to help me get set up right away. And at the time, there were these insane hiring freezes everywhere. So I was like one of the only people hiring. And so I was getting, you know, I got 120 plus applicants for the 2 technician positions, and many of them were very highly qualified, and I was very lucky. But you know, now it's been 2 years, and one of them went to grad school, and the other one sort of moved on to a great job in industry, and now I'm trying to look for replacements, and I'm seeing just the complete opposite, where I'm just it's really, really hard to hire people, and I don't know if this is anecdotal, but at least for me, I'm seeing that people's salary expectations have changed a lot, you know, in the past 2 years, and sort of what, you know, additional benefits and accommodations they're expecting, you know, have changed a lot. And I wonder if some of that, you know, ability to just open it up to more applicants, or, you know, have ways where when the hiring market is changing, the job market is changing, if there are ways that we can have additional incentives, is something that could be helpful. I know that wasn't really a question. That was just me telling you about my hiring woes.
Is it something that's on the radar? I'm sure.
Well, and I think that we and federal agencies can't do anything about foreign policy or immigration policy. So we've got our hands are tied there, that we have, you know, but and I think that at least, you know, we are cognizant that budgets will need to go up, but not just be salaries have gone up, that and the supply, everything has gone up. And so budgets will have to go up, and that we're seeing in facilities that there are huge cost overruns because of supply chain issues. And that is just the reality right now. And it's going to cost more. And it would be nice if whatever I just was going to say, just erase that because I wasn't allowed to say that. But, you know, just going to cost more, and the money will go as far as it will go. Maybe my colleagues at NIH have a better answer than that.
No, it's, I think that pretty much says what our ability is. You know, we only have one mechanism in which non-citizens, career development mechanism, which non-citizens are eligible for, and that's the parent K-99. And basically what we've provided there is the flexibility there is related to eligibility in that window. But we still want people to apply in their 3rd year, not wait until their 4th year to apply. So, you know, if you're doing that, then you're not going to have to worry about these extensions, but still there, you know, that's, and we can't do much. I mean, we hear all the time when the stipend goes up every year, there's a notice about the NRSA stipend levels. And when they go up every year, our PIs contact us and say, are you going to increase my budget so I can pay the new rate? And the answer is always no, we can't do that. So we tell them you're allowed to supplement those salaries at, you know, with local money as long as it's not from another federal grant. So, you know, our hands are tied. And I think Teresa said, you know, explain kind of where we are with that.
I mean, I think there is a sorry, Ian's had his hand up for a long time, but I think there is maybe you can bust the myth of the modular grant, because that's the solution, right? Is to ask for non-modular budget.
Yeah, you can do that. I don't, the only thing that might change is that the threshold for what, the modular grant budget, the one that doesn't require the categorical budget pages, might change to another threshold. But I'm not hearing much about that lately, so.
I will chime in from an NCI perspective, and this was a question that the NCI director, when Ned Sharpless was here, would get a lot when he was traveling around, modular budgets versus non-modular budgets. And so the NCI undertook actually a big analysis of sort of success rates and who was applying for what. The number of people applying for a modular budget over the last 5 years has gone down dramatically. It hasn't influenced success rates. And so the bottom line message is, write for the budget that is appropriate for doing the work.
Right.
And if you visit the NCI website and you go to the NCI director's blog, it was a couple months ago, but there's actually a whole little blog about modular budgets versus non-modular budgets.
Maybe Ian should ask his question now.
I was going to say.
I was going to, in some ways, I was going to take us back up. And so what's been fascinating to me listening to this conversation is, in some ways, we're talking about logistics and execution and some of the details, which matter a lot. But I think it may be worth actually stating out some of our overarching perspectives and values. And, I think where we are all as scientists, as funders, is we want to enable exceptional science. We want to enable discoveries that will benefit humanity, whether that be through medical purposes or other things. And we want to make a difference for people. And I think that the way that we can share and direct those values often is through how a funding agency works and how that navigates that. And I think that we've always had a component of that was related to how we read out the topic of an application. What is this studying and what's the potential to learn? What I found really interesting listening to multiple of the talks today is starting to see maybe some of those more values articulated in who and how is being funded, the HHMI program, what Lynn described in terms of the ACS and initiatives around surrounding diversity, what Teresa was showing just in terms of putting people first. Like that's a message that I really respond to, right? And so I think that this idea of, of articulating those values and putting them forward can be an important part of that role that funders have to play. And I value ACS is going to make a different choice than NSF, for example, in terms of what those are. But I think that this is a unique point to sort of shine a light on our need and our ability to clarify what those values are, particularly surrounding people as we navigate this. Again, not a question. I apologize for that.
So I will chime in from the NCI perspective. We also put out an initiative a number of years ago to support research scientists and people who are running core facilities and the such. And it's been a very successful, it's a very competitive program, but it allows you to remove those personnel from your own grant and support. It basically supports just their salary, doesn't sort of support them for the actual research that they're doing. But it has been a pretty successful program. And so if you have an NCI grant, encourage people to take a look.
Well, so, we introduced about, I guess, 7 or 8 years ago, the Maximizing Investigator Research Award, the MIRA R35. And what that program does is move away from an aim-driven project to supporting a research program. And each investigator, whether they're new or established, gets 5 years of support with a budget to be determined. Sometimes it's based on transition from existing awards to the MIRA, and sometimes it's for the ESI MIRA, it's capped at the modular threshold, $250,000 a year. But the expectation is that the PI is going to have the opportunity to pursue the questions that they feel are going to be most profitable scientifically for them. So they're not obligated to work on all three aims or goals of a project. They can do whatever they want. And even if they want to do something outside of the scope of what they've originally proposed, as long as it's within the mission of NIGMS, they can do that with that grant. But there is also an understanding that this isn't going to fund everything that you want to do in your lab. But it does give you, I think, the intellectual flexibility to pursue those questions that are, that kind of drive the fire in your belly, and that you're going to be able to make the biggest impact and contributions with. So we've had pretty good success with that program. And in a way, it augments a large number of the R01s that we have. But the other issue with that is that once you get a MIRA from NIGMS, that's the only RPG that you'll get from NIGMS. You're eligible to submit applications to other institutes, but it's only going to be that one NIGMS grant, other than a training type grant award or something like that. So we've been pretty successful. The success rate is pretty high. And for the most part, our PIs are pretty happy because, number one, they're not submitting 3 applications a year to NIH for grant support. They've got this one grant for 5 years. So there's 4 years between submissions. And I think it gives them the opportunity to kind of support a program rather than a circumscribed project. So that's one of our adjustments to, and the other part of the consideration in the review is the reviewers are actually asked to look at the contributions of the PI to other aspects of the enterprise in terms of mentoring, community service, education. All of those are score driving issues as well. So so we do incorporate this other, the relevance of the other parts of your academic life into, or your research life into what this grant supports. So.
Avi?
Yeah, so maybe I can ask a question that is related to Mara's question of Mary. So Mara asked if there's some perhaps bias in how reviewers are getting penalized for asking for non-modular budgets versus modular budgets. And I'm sort of curious, maybe I'll take that question up a little bit for the panelists here. So one impact of COVID has been that study sections have all gone virtual. And I'm wondering what you guys probably all sit in on these discussions. How has going virtual impacted the interpersonal interactions between reviewers that are such a big part of study section, that really are what make the system very super fair, how you build a consensus? Can you build the same consensus in a room of 20 people like this that you can in a room of 20 people where people can see each other's body languages and so on? What do you guys think about that? And is it worse? Obviously, there's advantages to doing this virtually. I love virtual study sections, but is something major lost?
Teresa?
So I'm going to start with what's gained, that there are people that, because they have small children or they live on the West Coast, whatever, there are people who can't participate in-person panels or study sections that can in virtual. I mean, people are taking breaks to go to their classes, that I think they're a little more distracted, but they're participating in the process. And if we really want review panels or study sections that look like the reviewer or look like the proposers, look like the people who are submitting the proposals, then we need to reach out to more of the community. That can't be just the people who don't have kids. And so I think that was really important. On the flip side, I do think that, I think people make reasonable decisions. I think they come to consensus. I think that happens. I think that there's all of this other mentoring, though, that happens at a panel. I'm assuming that I remember it happening at study sections back in the day when I was invited to them. But I know that there's all of this informal stuff that happens that doesn't happen on Zoom. And I think that that is a loss for the program directors to figure out what's going on in the community, to figure out what's exciting about science. It's a loss for the young people we invite to the panels to get mentored by other people. And so I'm not sold on virtual, even though I see advantages. So that's kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would say not sold on virtual. I know a lot we're hearing from our reviewers. When do we get to come back to Atlanta? I think, a hybrid is probably where we're probably going to go. We'll see. And I don't know if that means full on-site in January and then totally virtual in June, or if we're going to do 50-50 so we have always people around the room. I would say the American Cancer Society, and Ian served as a reviewer and a chair for many, many years. And maybe he can comment as well. But one thing that I think we have unique at the American Cancer Society is we have this ecosystem, and we recruit some of the people that have benefited from that funding. And they come in and they want to learn what's happening. And it really is a community in a very positive way. And, we don't pay lots of money for honoraria, but we do dine. I can't say wine and dine because they have to buy their own alcohol, but we dine, we get together, leadership talks to them. They get the inside scoop on some things. We lean on them for their advice programmatically. So that really gets lost. And we're finding now with back-to-back virtual, people are really busy and they're just saying, Lynn, too busy. It's all work, no play. And so you're missing out on that unique experience. And when you really use that time to listen carefully and to improve our processes. So, but from a budget perspective, you save lots of money, you allow flexibility. People can be in Europe doing something, and if they're willing to stay up late, they can be a part of it. So there are a lot of positives, but I just worry as we continue to do virtual all the time that I just think it's an inferior process over the long haul.
I will say from a programmatic point of view, having a meeting virtual usually allows us to actually hear what people are saying versus either trying to listen in on the phone, because then you're dependent on sort of the quality of the service that is being provided. So I've actually liked it from that sort of aspect. It has been my experience that people who are going to talk a lot in a room are still the people who talk a lot when they're online. So I understand and I agree with a lot of the comments that have already been made, but I would also say that I think the discussions have been remarkably good for the situation that we're in. Not from the NIH point of view and the system that they use, I can listen, but I can't be seen. And that allows me actually to be very animated when I don't agree with what reviewers are saying. And if I was there in the room, I would have to be very stoic. So it's a very selfish sort of thing, but it was just something else that I sort of noticed.
Well, I'll agree with everything that everyone said. I think there are advantages to the virtual setting in terms of getting good representation or better representation than we've had in the past, and getting the appropriate expertise, because people are willing to come in for a small number of applications instead of the entire pile. Then again, they're also distracted because they, just like all of us, they tend to multitask while they're online because they can do things and not be seen doing them. So, but there was always something about a study section culture that once the group got together, a group dynamic developed, and, you would talk about study section behavior and you would talk about different study sections, and everybody, after a while, the program officers would know when you started talking about a study section exactly which one you were talking about, because the collective dynamic of that group of individuals it was the identity of that study section. But Joanna's right. The study sections that took a long time to discuss single applications, maybe 30 minutes, probably 15 minutes longer than they needed to, they're still doing that. So a lot of it depends on the quality of the chair And this is where the mentoring part that Teresa mentioned, of mentoring each other on how to manage a review and how to manage people in this sandbox called the review panel, to get the, to stay on task and get things done and not spend, an inordinate amount of time doing it. Some of that is missing. So it really does require a skilled chair, and it always has, and it requires an attentive review officer, and it's always done that. I mean, I started as a review officer too. So I would go to, as a program officer, I'd go to meetings, and I wasn't a review officer anymore, and I'd get infuriated by how that meeting was run. But I can do that now since nobody sees me, and then share comments later with the SRO. But yeah, there's something missing, but I think the reality is going forward, just like our workplaces, we're going to be working in hybrid settings. Look, I've attended 2 meetings now since May, one in May and one in just last week. And I'm sure you've experienced this as well, if you've attended one recently, is how good it was to be in a group of like a group of people who in a similar profession, who have similar interests, and they're there for a reason, to hear about science or hear about training and career development, whatever, that there was something that they'd been missing from this hybrid or virtual environment for the last 2 years. As far as I know, the CSR is going to begin doing in-person meetings again in the fall, probably do at least one for the standing study section. At least one meeting a year will be in person, but even then there will be hybrid. The biggest change, I think, over the last 2 years is the technology is just so much better. Joanna commented that in the past, you couldn't hear half the time. You couldn't hear the reviewers. Well, now you can hear them and you can see them. So, those are good things in terms of the technology. If we didn't have this technology, I would say throw it out, but we do have it better than we did before. So, and I'm talking about having, sat in study sections as a review administrator, as a program officer for 25 years now or longer. So, we've seen a lot of things change. The other thing that's been happening, I think that's important for people to understand, is this new emphasis on training reviewers, or orienting reviewers is probably a better word than training, to recognize bias, implicit and unintentional bias, about institutions, about the gender or sex of the investigator, the applicant, about their degree pedigree, about publications, all of those things. So there's been real attention by the Center for Scientific Review to kind of reform and bring this culture, greater awareness and sensitivity to these issues to the review panels. And that seems, if that's effective and it lasts, and it's long lasting and can be sustained, that's the best thing for everybody that's doing science. And whoever's funding it, that's got to be a big part of and those changes they were start working on implementing those before everything shut down, but it got much more critical after George Floyd was murdered. Frankly, that was the impetus here.
So I guess we're coming up on 2 hours here, and I was hoping that we could maybe shift the discussion or change to kind of wrapping up what we've talked about. But one final question that I have for you panelists is, other than just kind of speaking up if we're asked to be on a study section, are there things that we as applicants can do or potential reviewers can do to sort of maintain awareness of potential long-term disproportionate effects of the pandemic on productivity, and make sure that these issues stay in the spotlight for as long as they're needed?
You can always reach out. You can always reach out to your program official. It doesn't have to be over something specific, but if you, certainly from the NIH point of view, if you want to chat, and if you want to chat about things that are continuing to affect you outside of you putting in a new grant or anything else, I would say the vast majority of us are more than happy to set up times to chat. And the only way that we're going to know what's going on in the extramural community is for you to reach out and to share that information. So, you know, I encourage everybody to get to know your program person. They are your advocate. And, you know, there's only so much that we can do, but at least if we know what's out there and where the problems are, it allows us to relay that information sort of up the chain to the leadership folk.
Yeah, and I would totally echo what Joanna said. We welcome grantees, prospective applicants to reach out to us. And like I said, sometimes we don't have the latitude to do things, but if we hear enough, you know, let's talk about a supplement. Who needs this and why, and how are we going to streamline it, and how are we going to address the greatest needs? So we need to hear from the scientific community to help guide our programmatic changes.
Absolutely. I will say another medium or another mode of communicating your thoughts is social media. We have our institute director, John Lorsch at NIGMS, is an avid Twitter follower. So if people post something on Twitter with a question, you know, we usually have to come up with an answer within a very short period of time for the public. So, you know, some of those questions as they're posed are a bit touchy or iffy, but, you know, he wants us to respond. And I think for the most part, we're happy to do that because it helps us demystify the whole process. It helps people navigate the system. So social media is another way you can communicate with that. But as Joanna said, your most important contact at NIH is your program officer. And if you haven't spent time doing that, then contacting your program officer, then that's a wasted opportunity. We can't make you do that. It's up to you. So that's something you need to share with everybody in the field.
Yeah, that is the most important thing about figuring out how to get funded at NSF or staying funded at NSF is to get to know your program officer.
Yeah. And I would also say that even if you don't have a grant, but you're working in a particular area, you know, we still encourage you to reach out and engage in that conversation. You know, are there initiatives that, you know, maybe I've missed, or are there other programs along those ways? Do you know of somebody who's doing this? Are there other resources that you can tap into, even if you don't have, in our case, an NCI grant, for example, those sorts of things. And that's what a program officer can actually provide you with that information.
Thank you. Well, do we have any final questions or closing remarks that anyone would like to ask or make? No?
So that was the thing that I usually end my talks with, is contact your program officer.
I'm glad I set you up for that, Michael.
So you set me up, Brittany. That was good. But also the other admonition is always read the program announcement, read our webpage. If you really want to know what the Institute's up to, then read the Institute Director's blog or weekly post or whatever, because that should help you target where your application should go.
And I just want to thank you all for bringing us together so we can have this conversation. We won't learn what the community needs if we don't talk to the community. And so, yeah, you can reach out to us directly, but creating these opportunities for us to come listen to you, I think is really beneficial for us. So thank you for setting it up, for all of you participating.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much. It's really great to hear that people on the other side of the email are realizing that there's some big sea changes going on, not just in past impact, but sort of how the workforce is evolving, and you know what people are going to do now in this. There's a generational change in people's attitudes and what they want to do with their science, and we really appreciate that you guys are cognizant of that and thinking about it and doing a very human focused effort.
I found it very uplifting to hear all of your perspectives and your efforts. So,
as your former program officer, I'm glad to hear that. So.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
I would also say, if anybody has any questions after the webinar ends, you can either reach out to any of us. I'm speaking for everybody. I don't know.
Yes.
If you have specific questions or if you want to send them through Avi and Brittany, we're happy to answer them sort of down the road as well.
Yeah, definitely reach out. And in terms of American Cancer Society, we have 2 grant deadlines, but we have a lot of special things that are off cycle. New things are coming out, so don't wait till the April 1 and October 5th. You know, once a month, look at cancer.org, see what's happening so you don't miss an opportunity. But don't hesitate to reach out. And if I don't have the answer, or if I don't direct that program or initiative, I will put you in touch with the person that is.
Thank you. And thank you, special thank you to Teresa, who organized all of this and fielded a lot of emails. So thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Everybody have a good day.
Wonderful rest of your week, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.